Natalie's going to be covering the topic of urban trees well-being and future generations. Thank you, Natalie.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, really good to have you all here. I'll be talking about trees. So I suppose I've always really loved trees. I moved to Reading when I was about 3, and my mum just recounts this story, how I shot up this conifer about sort of 40 foot high when I was 3 years old and had to be sort of coaxed down. We had a lovely apple tree in the garden. I used to love climbing that tree and hoisting each other up in buckets, picking the apples. And just since, trees have been a really big part of my life. And now my work involves a lot around connecting people in Reading with trees. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about nature nurture, what I'm doing there, and about some of the benefits of trees. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so trees, health and well-being we're going to focus on first. So many of us are from Reading, some of us are visitors to Reading, and certainly when you meet people and talk about your town, sometimes people have quite a grim idea about it. And I just think it's just one of those amazing places where you just have to scratch the surface a bit and you just see these incredible arts, culture scene, community scene, and also, of course, incredible array of green spaces. And that picture top left there where we've got the Civic Centre building. I don't know if any of you have sort of walked past in the last year or so, but there's an incredible community garden, lavender gardens there. So I think Reading's not what it can seem to be to many people. But so I grew up in Reading and I've always been really fascinated by that connection that humans have with nature. And I decided after university that I would seek that out. I was lucky enough to be an artist on an expedition in Belize and travelled over there and lived in Belize for about 4 months as an expedition artist. This is me just in my early 20s there many years ago, swinging through the jungle. We made our shelters out of jungle materials. We lived very closely with communities living in the jungle. And I just got very into this idea of how people were living so closely with nature in a sustainable way. My role as the artist was documenting jungle wildlife. I also got to paint a mural in a jungle village. That's me in the top right window there. And then I came back to Reading, did various things, had a bit of a career in design for a while, and then this is where I just around the corner from where I live, off the Oxford Road, and I reached a bit of a turning point in my life and just went for a walk wondering what to do. And I walked into Prospect Park and I walked into the Rookery woodland, which it was sort of April time and carpets of bluebells, absolutely beautiful. I'd not ventured in there before, and I sort of meandered off the path. I could hear woodpeckers. I was just immersed in this incredible wildlife, and it just struck me that Reading really was this pretty amazing place, if such a place like this Rookery could just be a few minutes from my house. So I then started just looking further and began to map some of these areas in the West. So I sort of coined it the Wild West, a bit like sort of Buffalo Bill's Wild West, because I just find this side of Reading, it can get talked down a bit. And I just really wanted to help people celebrate really these incredible places. And I found McIlroy Park and Arthur Newberry Park and Laos Hill Copse. And this is it just sort of shows a bit of a project that we put together called a Family Wild Day, which I'll just show you now. So yeah, being just so deeply inspired by discovering these spaces, I just started venturing all over Reading, and I knew a few of the parks and woods as a kid, but it was just really realizing just how incredibly lucky we are, and that really turned into a mission about how can we as a really small organisation connect as many people across the community with these spaces. So we do that in a variety of ways. We've got a sort of wild wellbeing programme for adults. We do a lot of work in early years settings and primary schools, and a lot of that is about training teachers how to use not only their school grounds but local woodlands for teaching, and we like to create trails in places and put on various events. So we've been committed to that for coming on 10 years, and it's really important to us to make everything we do free. So we're constantly applying for grants because we just really want to put across that message that nature is for everybody. So at the moment, a lot of things where people were being physically active and their recreation, as we know with COVID-19 and this second lockdown, are closed. And it really just strikes me how more important than ever are those nature connections. And I know that the Wildlife Trust in June with the 30 Days Wild, I think they had about 400% increase in people connected with that programme. And I think we can see ourselves when we wander around parks and woods just how much people are valuing nature and being outdoors, because it is something we're allowed to do. And I think a lot of people in conversation I heard talk about bird song and other aspects of nature that they really were valuing. So just thinking about Reading, this is just this it's a mapping tool that sort of blurs out all the buildings and roads. We can sort of see some of these wild spaces, but we are really blessed with having these spaces just a walk away. I'm now just going to talk about some aspects of how nature really supports our health and well-being. So first of all, so looking at physical activity, it turns out that greener neighbourhoods, people are more active when they live in a greener neighbourhood, and even when they take into account the sort of socio-economic status of people, they find that once you have parks and woods and waterways, people are more active. Children playing in an outdoor setting, it improves their motor strength, balance and coordination, and it turns out that the motivation to get outdoors and be active is increased in green space. And I think for some of us who might not be up for exercise classes or going to a gym, you know, just going for a walk or a bike ride or something like that, it's something accessible for everyone. It turns out as well that being in a woodland environment can be really good for our immune systems. I think they say that 30 minutes in a woodland, the positive impact can last up to a month afterwards. And some researchers are linking that with the microbacterium in the soil. Others are looking at something called phytoncides, which is something that trees put out to protect themselves, but it turns out that in breathing those, they're good for our immune system as well. And then just looking at mental health and well-being, some research out of the University of Essex, it turns out that just 5 minutes in nature, obviously we'd all have more than that, but even 5 minutes, so if you can just grab 5 minutes of your day, is meant to improve our mood and self-esteem. And some research that goes back to the 1960s around something called biophilia, and it was an American researcher called Wilson, and he was looking at recovery rates when people were in hospital, looking out of a hospital window and looking at a brick wall compared to looking at an environment with trees and other nature, and that they were recovering a lot quicker and were a lot easier for the nursing staff to look after, much less stressed and less aggressive. And that more recent research correlates with them looking at people working in offices and their views as well. And I'll be talking about air quality in the next sort of presentation, but so another somewhat surprising aspect of green areas is actually reducing crime with trees around. A researcher in Chicago discovered that areas with trees, it was around strengthening those social ties between neighbours, but also that crime rates were lower as well. And I think something really key, something that's really come out of the Natural England research prior to COVID, but then exacerbated through the pandemic, is around those who are accessing nature. And there are really huge inequalities there. And it's just something I think we really need to address, but that interventions and improving quality of green spaces in areas of deprivation, areas of ethnic diversity, connecting people with living with various disabilities, it's a real positive way to tackle inequalities as well. So, and just looking at those inequalities, there's some really fantastic mapping tools, and Catherine's going to show you one later that they're using with Ethical Reading's Trees for Reading initiative, looking at prioritising where to increase canopy cover. And again, there's a real correlation between sort of quality nature spaces and tree canopy cover and areas of deprivation. So it's just a real key thing there. And then just a little bit about some of our projects. So this is the wild teaching program that we came up with that was funded through 2019, and then it was cut a bit short in March, but it was supported by Department of Education and DEFRA, and they are taking very seriously that mental health impact of nature connection. So they've been supporting various projects around the country to support children's mental health and well-being through nature connection, and we were really lucky to work on one of those projects. And for us, it's rather than be the specialists that go in and do those intense workshops, we very much work closely with teachers and the senior leadership teams. And our aim is really to transform schools into places that totally embrace the outdoors, to planting trees in their grounds, forest school in local woodlands, and other sort of outdoor learning. But it's all about how can we empower and transform schools to give children that nature connection that many of whom won't be having at home. And this is just an example. So this is Laos Hill Copse in West Reading, where we've been working with the Dee Park community for many years now. But it just shows where I've just circled there. That's all the schools that are within 15 or 20 minutes walk from Laos Hill Copse. So we did a program where we trained teachers from all those schools. And it was really how to use Laos Hill Copse as an outdoor program covering the whole curriculum, and just so it can be a real extension of that teaching space. And again, with COVID, I think those outdoor environments are really more important than ever. And then with the community, I mentioned before about Wild Days. So we've been doing sort of citizen science BioBlitz events. We've worked with the Canal and River Trust at Fobney Island. That wonderful space, Fobney Island Nature Reserve. If ever you go to RE3, the recycling centre, if you turn right instead of turning left into the recycling centre, there's just a wonderful nature reserve, and you can actually walk there from the town centre as well. So that's just, for us, a typical place where we really want to raise awareness of such a great space. We were going to put on a Wild Wellbeing Day. That was going to be our first event after with COVID, but sadly it had to be delayed because of this second lockdown. We hope to put that event on soon. And then I was just going to talk about Mission Laos Hill. So that was another project in Laos Hill Copse. So this was with the conservation volunteers, and their program was about assessing the biodiversity of Laos Hill Copse and really trying to improve the habitat for some of these priority species. And our role was, how do we take the community along the way with that? So we came up with this idea of Mission Laos Hill, that actually the local kids could act as spies in the woodland. So I'll show you how that looked. So we were, yeah, really lucky with that project. We ended up winning a national award for community development from the Institute of Outdoor Learning. So that's been really exciting. So, and other work in Laos Hill Copse, we've had a grant through the Heritage Lottery Fund working with the conservation volunteers to create interpretation boards and a walking leaflet and a whole activity trail that we designed called the Wild Workout. So we thought about all the woodland animals, and we worked out different activities they could do, and there's a whole trail that people can do through the woods now there. Another program we're offering to the corporate sector is around workplace well-being. As you can imagine, that's on hold for the moment, but we just think there's such a strong tie between that nature connection, doing something really purposeful in your neighborhood, and some element of training as well, that would be around groups of corporates in different green spaces in Reading, helping making improvements and gaining health and wellbeing along the way. And this is a project, we're very interested in the social prescribing space as well. So, and there's a real growing movement of green prescribing. So where doctors would be aware of the conservation and the other sort of nature-based walking and other initiatives in their area. And we're trying to bring together conservation, the arts, and then a new partnership with Mental Health Mates in Reading, which is a really fantastic walking initiative for people living with mental health challenges and their family and friends to sort of join a walk. And we were just thinking, wouldn't that be brilliant if they could maybe get involved in some conservation, cook over a fire, get involved in some art. So that's a project we're working on at the moment. And just to say, it's not just us, there's loads of amazing organisations in Reading. There's the Reading Tree Warden Network, and they brought out a lovely range of walking leaflets. There's the Tilehurst Globe group, and they've brought out for Tilehurst and West Reading some leaflets about walks. And there's Two Rivers Press with some friends of mine, Adrian Lawson and Jeff Sawyers, who are brilliant nature experts, artists, writers, who've put together some lovely resources and books about those things that are happening in Reading. And then, of course, Trees for Reading, the Ethical Reading Initiative, which Catherine will be telling us about as well. So thank you very much. Yes, we just thought we'd just delve a bit deeper into the climate change and biodiversity aspect of trees, we've looked at how trees benefit our own health and well-being, but just looking more broadly and particularly thinking about an urban setting. So I've just created this tree just for us to look at. So having looked at health, well-being, strengthening communities, I just thought we'd have a look at cooling urban temperatures. So this is what we don't want to be aiming for. So Reading 2030, we've got all these fantastic aspirations and action plan in the new Reading climate change strategy that's out. I don't know if any of you have heard of urban heat island effect. So that's looking at where urbanized areas, they are experiencing much higher temperatures than the natural areas around them, and that's because of the way that buildings and roads and other urban infrastructure really absorbs that sun's heat. So when it comes to trees, if we can restore and look after our existing tree habitats, and if we can plant new trees, that will really help with easing those urban temperatures as we anticipate things getting warmer. And there's something we found here about strategic placement of trees in urban areas can cool the air by up to 8 degrees in hot weather. And this also can have an impact on reducing our need for air conditioning, so that will save on energy as well. Over to you, Catherine, about CO2.
Well, thank you, Natalie. So yeah, a tree, obviously we know that trees absorb CO2 because there's a lot spoken about that. And actually they can absorb up to 150 kilograms of CO2 per year by locking that away and then preventing it being out in the atmosphere. One study showed that between the CO2 absorbed and the emissions avoided by the things that Natalie just talked about, a New York street tree can cut up to 52 kilograms of CO2 per year. So that's great, but although the trees in towns do absorb carbon, they offer much more powerful benefits for the local atmosphere. Over to Natalie again.
Okay, yeah, just looking at air quality and how trees can, sorry, there's just something appeared on my screen there. Yeah, and how the porous leaves can purify the air by trapping carbon and other pollutants, and it makes them essential players in the fight against climate change. There is quite a lot of complexity around the different particulates, and I know there's various projects where we've been assessing pollutant levels in different areas of Reading and different areas of London, and something around this as well. The Nature Conservancy estimated that planting the maximum number of trees possible in the cities they studied would reduce deaths caused by particulate air pollution by 2.7 to 8.7%. And if you can imagine, all these things are going to be linking with asthma and bronchitis and diminished lung function, and being in the Thames Valley, those are particular issues for us. So just a word there, it's not just about any trees and planting trees, it's quite complex, so I found, but it's definitely that certain types of tree are going to really help us there. And then Catherine, about water management and flooding.
Thank you, Natalie. So yes, trees can actually reduce runoff by intercepting stormwater. That helps to prevent water pollution and erosion as well. But more importantly, they can prevent flooding, town trees in particular. They intercept rainfall, they absorb it, and they increase soil infiltration and increase the frictional resistance of the soil as well. So that actually helps to prevent flooding issues occurring. And with the increasing trend for winter flooding in the UK, that's going to become even more important with global climate change that is occurring, whether we really like it or not. And in New York, it turns out that street trees intercept 3.37 billion litres of stormwater every year. So that's an average of 5,772 litres per tree. So the difference is actually huge that they can make, but they can make an even more important difference when it comes to the biodiversity that comes into our towns. Natalie, back to you.
Thank you. So then, biodiversity and how trees and woodland areas are supporting such a wide range of species. So a mature oak tree can support over 250 types of species, and with more different types of species we're more resilient as well. And around the need for urban forests, there was a study in Amsterdam looking at 200,000 trees across Amsterdam and seeing how they were creating homes for wildlife for 140 species of birds, 34 species of mammals. And the other interesting thing as well is not just looking at how they support different animals, but there's just really interesting stuff out now about those mycelium networks, so that sort of fungal network running underneath, and how even what looks like a dead tree stump is likely, through those roots and mycelium fungal networks, likely to supporting other trees in that woodland area as well. Catherine, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Natalie, I thought you were going to talk about this final slide, but actually this is a perfect segue into what I'm going to be talking about. So as it says here, one generation plants the trees and another gets the shade. So it's actually really important that the trees we're putting in are not just going to benefit us, but they are going to benefit future generations of people who live and work in Reading. So it's actually a really powerful thing that we can all do by contributing to the tree cover here in our town. So Natalie, would you like, sorry, Natalie.
Sorry, I was just going to add that looking at Reading's tree strategy, it's interesting how what they're looking at planting now is actually looking at 40 years ahead, and what that will mean. So that means quite a challenge of balancing between looking at native species like a tree like a beech, which has quite shallow root structure compared to some of the Mediterranean varieties, and it's looking at what's going to be resilient, but also keeping hold of our native species and looking at all those all the biodiversity around those that we need to support as well. So thank you again, and back to you, a bit about Ethical Reading's initiative.
So thank you very much, Natalie. I really appreciate you stepping in and coming up with that amazing graphic that really brought it to life. I hope everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. So yeah, now we've got a good idea of how beneficial urban trees can be. Let's talk a little bit about what we're doing at Ethical Reading to bring more of them to the town. So I'm a volunteer in the sustainability team, and together we're working to try to make Reading a better place to live and work. So one of the ways we're doing that is through our Trees for Reading initiative. We launched that in November 2019, and the aim is to mainly attract funding from local businesses to bring more trees to our town. We're doing that in partnership with Reading Tree Wardens and Reading Borough Council. We held the launch event at Thames Lido. They were actually our first corporate sponsor. Earlier in the year, they'd offered to donate all of the money that came from their new parking charge to our initiative, which was amazing. It really gave us a brilliant start. And we planted our first tree in front of the Lido, which is an Acer Freemanii autumn blaze, to mark the launch, which you can see there. So there's as Natalie mentioned, a new tree strategy out that came out this March. And that includes that there is a target to increase canopy cover by 25%. Originally, the target was to do that by 2050, but that's now been changed to 2030. But the council admit that they would struggle to do that with the funding that they have available themselves, because central government funding has been cut back significantly, which has resulted in tree planting budgets across the country being slashed. So it's possible that we could help in some way by bringing in more funding. So you can see here the 2 different years. So in 2017-18, they were able to plant 242 trees, and the following year, just 127 trees. So by accessing corporate funding, we hope that we can help by giving also local businesses the opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to the town. So it works both ways. So where we are going to put our trees, when we first started to develop the initiative, we were really focusing on the town centre, because that's where most people benefit. Everybody goes into the town centre, people work there, people pass through there for leisure and to spend their free time. So that would benefit everybody. But actually, from speaking to the council, we realised that it's really challenging to plant trees right in the centre because of all the hard standing and the utilities under the ground. So based on that, we decided to focus on putting 10% within the IDR, the inner distribution road, another 50% in the other areas that would benefit most. So those would be schools, for example, and just deprived areas of the town, and then put the remaining 40% elsewhere in the borough of Reading. It turns out that our initial instinct was right, actually, because since then we've now come across some iTree canopy data, which shows where the trees are more dense around the town. And in actual fact, the town centre, which is mainly Abbey Ward, that just has 11.6% tree cover. And more disturbingly, deprived areas like Whitley and Catesgrove have among the lowest. So Whitley has 8 and Catesgrove has 10.4% tree cover, and that compares to 32% in Maple Durham. And actually there is a real correlation between tree cover and social deprivation. There's a study that was carried out in 2017. It was a meta-analysis of the research into the relationship between urban tree cover and income. And it concluded there appear to be substantial levels of urban forest cover inequity with respect to income. And we'd really like to level things up a bit here in Reading. So if you go on our website in the Trees for Reading section, you can see this interactive map where you can see the trees that we planted in the 2019-20 planting season. So there were 8 trees that we planted altogether, and seven of those were funded by Thames Lido, and those are shown here. You can see there are 3 Acer Freemanii autumn blaze outside the Lido. There's 1 London plane on Vaston Road roundabout opposite Thames Water, and there are 3 liquid amber trees between Bath Road and Granville Road where the flats are, so that provides a much nicer outlook and helps to trap some of the pollution coming off the busy Bath Road. As you can see, these are not little whips that we're putting in, they're substantial young trees and they make an immediate impact, but they do need watering for the first couple of years to make sure they get established, and the council have agreed to do that for us for the first 2 years. And also all the trees we put in are going to be marked with a plaque, so anyone passing by will be able to see how they came to be there. The other tree that we put in, we're really excited about. That one we did in conjunction with Brighter Futures for Children. And that one is specifically designed to help children in care feel rooted in Reading. The idea came from a 14-year-old boy who'd just been placed in foster care outside Reading, and he was starting to feel he was losing his connection with his hometown. And he came up with this amazing idea, and we were so happy that we could actually make it happen. And we chose the tree to his exact specifications. It was a tree that lives long, grows tall, and has a whitey pink blossom that flutters in the breeze. So he was really happy, and he was really moved that we were able to do that. And hopefully it will be a really important place for children in care to come back and feel that they've got roots in the town. So how can you help? So we've launched a new crowdfunding campaign that you can find at crowdfunder.co.uk/trees for Reading. And that's mainly for individuals. So if you are part of a business that might like to help us out, please do drop us an email at sustainability@ethicalreading.org.uk, and you can find out more on our website. Just go to the Trees for Reading button that you'll see on the homepage of the website.